the Framework 13. TLDW, this is an awesome laptop and I am switching to it as my daily driver. I won't hold back how impressed I am with this AMD Ryzen 5-7640U version. Yes, there are some limitations to it and some cons, but I can get over them. More on that later. So for now, let's get into it. So let's take a walk around the finished system. In my unboxing video, you saw the insides and how it all went together. Now here's the finished product with Windows 11 installed and all the expansion card slots occupied. Now I'm not going to spend so much time on the overall aesthetic and layout of the laptop as it's the same as every other Framework 13, but it's very good and there are tons of reviews that cover it, so go ahead and look for those. The hinge is nice, it goes 180 degrees. The weight is 2.86 pounds and feels good to carry around and generally use. Also, check out this neat feature that when you charge it, either side shows charging with a little orange light that changes green when fully charged. This also corresponds with limits set in the BIOS, and I set my battery to 85% max charge and it stops and turns green once it hits that limit. So very nice feature. Let's take a look at the screen. It's nice and bright. I typically use it at 50% brightness and 70% in brighter ambient lighting scenarios. I save the 100% 400 nits brightness for that extra boost or if I need to use it outside for any reason. The matte screen is preferred, especially over my Dell XPS that was glossy. It might not be as color accurate, but from what I've heard, it covers 100% sRGB and that works for me. I don't have a colorimeter, so I can't tell you how accurate that is. It doesn't have a touchscreen, but I so rarely use it on the Dell that I don't really miss it. But enough of that, let's get into the fun stuff. So we'll start with the battery life. Here was my test setup. I picked a day, it was a Sunday. I started at 100% and ran it for an hour and a half at 30% brightness. The battery was at 84% at that point, and then it idled for 30 minutes.
6.5 hours later.
So in this usage scenario, I got a combined 4 hours and 50 minutes. That's not too bad considering I was watching a game streamed online for nearly 3 hours of that time. With my Dell, I'd be lucky to even get an hour and a half before I'd be plugging it in. So let me tell you, that Ryzen 5-7640U is no slouch. Even with only 6 cores and 12 threads, I was able to encode my DaVinci Resolve test using AV1 encoding in 1 hour, 13 minutes, and 5 seconds. Doing an H.264 4K encode took it 4 hours and 16 minutes and 28 seconds. When comparing it to other systems I have, this was a little bit slower, but you know, we are dealing with a laptop. This is new testing for me now, since this is the first system I have that supports AV1 encoding. All my GPUs currently are RTX 3000 or Radeon 5000, and they don't support that. The R5-7640U cranked out a whopping 11,012 in multi-core and 1635 single-core in Cinebench R23. This is leaps and bounds better than the 10875H 8-core 16-thread chip that was in my XPS 15. You can take a look at that here. One thing I wanted to note before we head into the gaming test, PCIe Dynamic Link Power Management. You want to set this to enabled. If you don't, the GPU will only hit like 15 watts. And once I switched this to enabled, I was hitting 30 watts and more, even up to 40 watts in some games. Now onto the gaming test with the Radeon 760M and its 8 compute units. For reference, the 780M has 12 compute units and is what they use in the 7840U and Ryzen Z1 Extreme chips like the ROG Ally and Lenovo Legion Go, amongst other handhelds. For this test, I put the XPS 15 and the Framework side by side, so the footage here looks a bit funky, and I also forgot to reset the 1% lows, so ignore those. But the averages should be good, so let's check it out. Let's get down in here. Alright, so for this first test, we're going to run these both at 720p. This is going to be the best case scenario for both of these laptops to hit 60 FPS. So now the Dell XPS has a GTX 1650 Ti 4GB card. Framework laptop has the 760M integrated graphics. So far, it's been running cooler just setting things up and testing up to here, but I'll leave my judgments for later. But let's go into the settings that we're using here. The framework, and they're going to be the exact same settings, so I'll just show you on the framework. We got window borderless here. Aspect ratio 16:9, and I set windows to 720p. The scaling is weird. I'm going to turn VSync off. That should have been off. Let's see, FXA on, MSA X2. And then we're going to go high settings on everything. X2 on the reflection MSA. High, and I'm going to do AMD CHS soft shadows. And then X16 for anisotropic filtering, ambient occlusion, and tessellation at normal. As far as the advanced graphics goes, not touching those, I'm leaving those stock. So we've got about 76, 77 on the framework, and about, I don't know if that's any better. I mean, it kind of changes. They go back and forth. Now it's 78, 81 on the Dell 1650 Ti. And you can see our CPU usage, 41% on the 7640U and 32% on the 10875H. So this one is definitely leaning towards GPU power and not as much on the CPU power side of things. About 30 watts on the framework and about 32 watts on the 1650 Ti. 96 FPS average, it's about 109 FPS average on the framework. Running high settings at 720p, no resolution scaling, no ray tracing, no HDR. And we're gonna match them up here, so let's see what it looks like. So looking this way, 95 FPS to 106 FPS. So looking out over here, 80 FPS. It looks like 100 FPS over on the Dell. But then the Dell starts to thermal throttle and then it drops. So that happens a lot. One of my main issues with it. 35 watts on the GPU over on the S760M, about 32 watts on the Dell. Temperature warning on my meter here because it's way too stinking hot for it because it's drawing way too much. And I'm probably gonna have to pull my meter off here before it overheats and blows up. Let's switch this over to the framework and see what this is doing while under load. Temps are settling in again. Let's go and check out the reading over here. We are getting about 52 watts on the framework, and the temp has gone down on my meter by about 11 degrees Celsius. Now the FPS is still remaining a little higher on the Dell, but then the thermal throttling kicks in and it drops it. I'm not using any screen recording, just because I don't want to bog down the systems at all. I could use capture, but I feel like this is a more accurate side-by-side representation of how these things work. I will say the Dell screen is better at tracking motion and movement. The framework screen is not the greatest for gaming in general, just because there seems to be ghosting that happens. Just getting everything set up here, 720p as well. We're gonna do FSR 2.2 quality with sharpness set to 1.0. And we're gonna do the same preset of medium on both systems, so let's go. This game I feel like is a little bit more CPU intensive, so we'll see how that compares between the two when it affects the FPS performance. Here we go, we got 49% CPU usage over on the 10875H. The FPS is higher though over on the framework at 59% CPU usage. So we are going for 720p, VSync off, and we're gonna use the Steam Deck preset. Okay, all right, we're on the Steam Deck preset, VSync off, so let's load in here. Kind of hard to see what's going on with this game, but such a dark game. But it looks like the CPU is about 55%, and the GPU is at 92% utilization, hanging on to 60 average, so that's good. Let's switch over to the Dell. So about 62%, 65% on the CPU, I should say. And the GPU keeps dropping down to about 30. Now it's back to 60, 65. I mean, both are pretty playable. The Dell seems to be dropping more, though. I think the CPU is heating up and it's causing things to drop more. So just idling here, 51 FPS average, while the 760M is giving you 60 FPS. Alright, let's check out Shadow of the Tomb Raider. 720p, XESS at balanced, with VSync off. And graphics are set to high here, let's go to low. Let's run the benchmark at the same time. So, boom. We'll see how these compare as far as load-in times as well, because the Dell is running a Gen 3 PCIe NVMe, and the framework is running a Gen 4 NVMe. So we'll see how this fares. Nope, it's already loaded in faster. And we're still waiting for the Dell to catch up. CPU is definitely working harder on Shadow of the Tomb Raider. On the CPU is definitely working harder on the Dell. Got about 85% utilization, while the framework is at about 53. GPU bound 87% on the framework. So it was 3% GPU bound on the Dell, and it looks like the average FPS was 70. So I mean, you're getting better performance at the same settings. At half the wattage, you are getting better performance. 47 watts currently on the meter. I could hear the fans running pretty well. Let's just do a body test of thermals. So yeah, it looks like about 48, kind of in this zone here. Meanwhile, about 45 in the hottest spot there. Alright, so we're gonna go borderless, 720p. We got no 8x, FXA, medium, medium, yes. High, yes. Alright, so right off the bat, CPUs are roughly the same, about 45% usage on both of them. The Radeon, though, is pulling 79 FPS right now, while the Dell and the GTX 1650 Ti are only doing about 62 FPS. It's not beating it right now, that's for sure. You know, see now this scene, and now it's beating. I think it's all thermals. It all comes down to thermals. The TDP, I believe, is 45 watts for this chip, where it's only like 35 watts or 25 watts for the 7640U. I will put it on screen right now to show you what they actually are. The framework can do what the Dell can do, but at half the wattage. If you've noticed, this whole time I've been rambling on, it's been maintaining its FPS. It's been holding steady. Meanwhile, the Dell is up and down, back and forth. That's all I need to check out in Just Cause. Let's go to another game. I've set it to 720p and graphics ultra, and we have VSync off. Dynamic resolution is off, and we're in the campaign here. We'll just do a little walking around. Let me turn around here. Take a look down here. And we'll take a look over here.
Okay,
The does dip below 60 a few times. If we wanted to have that higher refresh rate or the above 60 with less dips, then we could go back to the balance preset. Okay, here's the balance preset. Doesn't really look that much different at 720p. See, we're getting over 100 FPS. Some views are giving us about 70, 80. I probably, if I'm playing this, probably gonna set it here. And then for the campaign, maybe VSync lock it, but definitely playing online, you want this unlocked. So we are at borderless full screen, no VSync, and unlocked minimum frame rate and maximum frame rate. And we're gonna use the low preset. So this is kind of the scene that I use here, just coming up towards whatever this is, full of Covenant. Tower, I guess. As you can see, we aren't even able to maintain 60 FPS.
12 seconds later.
So I initially recorded this footage, set the graphics to low at 720p, and I wasn't even getting barely at 50 FPS. It was kind of horrible. So I went back in and I set it to medium, but then I also set minimum frame rate to 60 FPS. So we're still at 1280 by 807. Anyway, after I picked medium, I went back into the game, and now I'm getting over 60 FPS. Not the entire time, but it is giving me like 62, 63. I used to look this way and I would drop way down, but now it's staying very playable. So I don't know, I mean, there's no resolution scaling. As far as I know, maybe that is resolution scaling. It's hard to tell. They don't really outright say it. But there's no DLSS, there's no FSR support. You know, that's not helping us here. This is just 720p rendered. You know what though? On the go, mobile, I'd play it like this. Okay, Forza Motorsport, we have them both set to 720p, full screen, frame rate on, FSR 2.0 balanced. So low, performance target, we need this unlocked. Resolution scale, we're gonna do this locked at 100%. Set everything to low here, and motion blur off. You notice the estimated VRAM usage on the framework showing 3610 of 4011 megabytes. Now that's the basic shared limit after you change the settings in the BIOS, and I'll show you that here, where you can set the optimized mode for gaming. And you want to do that if you're going to do any gaming on this. And if you only have 16 gigs of RAM, that might be kind of a limitation. You kind of might have to think about balancing that a little more, but just in general usage, 32 has become the new kind of gaming standard, I feel like. You can see the estimated VRAM usage, and the 1650 Ti only has that 4 gigs. Once that gets used up though, then you overrun the buffer and you start getting heavy stuttering and it just won't play very nicely. I love this car. If you saw my last video, I've got one of these in my garage. Okay. Oh, I don't know what happened on the framework. We were doing fine. That wasn't expected. I don't know what's going on. That might be all the footage we get. So there you have it. The 7640U and its 760M graphics is a decent choice if you want to get in on a framework laptop at that $849 starting price for the DIY unit. I saw enough reviews of the 7840U, and yes, it is faster, but I didn't see enough of a performance increase to merit a $320 price hike. That would start us at $1169 US for the DIY edition, and then tack on more if you get it pre-assembled. So as I will restate here, this laptop is real decent for what it is, and I am more than happy with it. So now for some pros and cons. For some pros, it's lightweight at 2.86 pounds. That's a huge thing. That Dell was almost 5 pounds. It was heavy. It's repairable and also moddable. Stay tuned for more on that, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Really nice keyboard to type on. And the screen is decently nice with its 2256 by 1504 resolution and 400 nits, as well as being matte. It's a matte display, so it's not glossy. Plenty of performance, and it stays cool and quiet during light work. It does ramp up a little bit when you're doing gaming and benchmarking and taxing that CPU, but during light browsing and stuff, it's quiet. The battery life, very respectable. Now for some cons. The touchpad is a little bit unresponsive. I had to crank the sensitivity all the way up for it to respond a little bit better. This could likely get fixed in a firmware update, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. There's no touchscreen options available. It's not a deal breaker for me, but it is kind of a nice to have. The 4 expansion ports are great for interchangeability, but that's all you get. Thankfully, there's a headset jack, as that would have drove me nuts to have to sacrifice an expansion port for that. One other thing is the lack of another M.2 slot. I added a 2 terabyte main drive, and it's good, but just wish there was another slot for even like a 2230 M.2. That would have been nice. So, in conclusion, it's a great laptop, and I can get over the little things I just mentioned and have a decent time with it. Its performance and battery life, as well as heat on the lap, are just way better than my Dell, so I'm just thrilled with how it's going so far. Anyway, that will wrap things up on today's episode. If you're interested in anything shown here, I'll put some links down in the description. So stay tuned for more on this laptop. It's been a request from some that I'd run Linux on here, so I'm going to try running one of those Steam Deck distros and see how that goes. Until next time, take care and God bless.